Welcome to this episode of Pen to Paper Press Podcast. I'm Cindy Kochis. I enjoy spending time with best-selling authors, writers, editors, publishers, and creative souls to talk about the process of developing our stories to completing our works of art. Each episode is an opportunity for us to explore mindsets, pearls of wisdom, and the experiences that began our journey as an author from the moment we put pen to paper. Joining me in the studio today is Mary McGuire. Mary is a transformation consultant and the author of The Female Edge and Coming Home to You. In 2006, she started Agents to Change to bring a values-led approach to organizational transformation. Welcome, Mary. It is wonderful to have you here on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Cindy. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to talk about all things books and writing with you today.
Yes, it's always so much fun to talk about the writing process, the journey, what got us going, in that direction, because even though each of us has an independent story, there are so many elements of it that are very similar. And it's nice to know that we're not the only one that's feeling like, really, I got to do this today, or yay, this is what it feels like. It's nice to be able to share that, quote unquote, with someone.
Absolutely. I think generally, I think that we undervalue how important our story is to the world. So it doesn't matter how humble that story is, or how we maybe feel that we haven't touched that many lives. The reality is there will be something in that story which is an inspiration to other people, and I think that's what often gets in the way of us even putting pen to paper and starting to write, is because we believe that we are insignificant and our story is insignificant. And I think that's one of the things that is one of the big wrongs in the world, that we tend to play small because we don't believe our story is relevant.
You hit on something that is so powerful, and it is that self. When we look in the mirror, how do we feel about self, and how do we talk to ourselves, and how do we feel about ourselves? I mean, truly, you really hit it on the head about how do we feel? Do we feel insignificant? If we feel insignificant, how are we going to move forward? How are we energetically and mentally and physically going to move whatever project it is that we dream of doing? How are we going to move it forward? So one question I wanted to ask, actually, it's a lead into a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. And, I was looking at both your books earlier this morning, and both of your books have a focus on transformation. It's very clear. I mean, look at the titles to your books. And typically authors write about topics that they are very familiar with. And of course, we add our, elements of ourself into the storyline because that's our basis, is our own experiences. So what inspired you to write Coming Home to You?
That was my first book. So that was out about 4 years ago. And essentially, I had to make a journey back to myself. I got lost along the way of, surviving difficult childhood circumstances where it was very dysfunctional, and there was lots of anguish around growing up in the family that I had. Going into work with no qualifications, left school with no qualifications, and then finally finding a way through that, going back to college, getting my qualifications, getting into a career. My first career was social work, and then moving into the big transformation space that I'm in now, which is as a consultant with global companies, and doing very well. But what happened with that outward success was I had an internal implosion, which came out in health. So my health went haywire, and I was working very hard. I was traveling all around the world because my clients were global, so I had to go wherever the work was. So that was places in Europe, and it was in Russia and Azerbaijan, it was in Africa and Angola and in the US and all over. Very interesting, very interesting. Looks glamorous from the outside. It's actually just exhausting most of the time. But I was so busy on that external, I was missing some quite fundamental spiritual development. And what happened was I got very ill in Angola, ended up in hospital, came back, and then my immune system went into free fall because I had just brought in a virus or a bug that actually attacked all of my immune system. So it took me, and I just about scraped through managing to get some work done. I had to drop a lot of my clients, but actually trying to find my way through it. There was two big turning points in that. The illness itself served its purpose. So its purpose was, wake up, Mary. You're going through life, you're sleepwalking through life, you're focusing purely on the idea that external success is success, and you're failing to acknowledge anything internally that's important for you. So the reason I called it Coming Home to You is because I believe all of us have this journey that when we're born and we're in our childhood situation, we're just getting to know who we are. Then we go out into the world as a young person, and we go further and further out into the world to explore it. And we, not always, but often get disconnected with who we are. And then at some point we have to stop that and say, okay, how do I come back to myself and find out who I am now? So the Coming Home to You is about coming back to ourselves again. And that was the journey I had to go on. And what I learned was I had to take responsibility for my health because the doctors were quite frankly useless. I was going from one specialist to the next. Each one of them was treating just a portion of my problem, not all of it. They weren't looking at me holistically at all. And I was getting incredibly frustrated, getting more and more drugs being given to me to solve this problem and that problem and the other problem, none of them solving anything. And I went to an energy practitioner, and she did some wonderful realigning of my chakras, which if you're viewers aren't familiar with, they're based on the meridian lines or the energy lines in our body, and we have 7 particular junctions and points which we call chakras, and she realigned all of them. And I can't say I walked out of her consultation room like walking on air and everything was different, but I felt something fundamental had shifted. Mm-hmm. And I realized I had to take the journey inward, and I had to take responsibility for my own health, as I do my own life and my intentions and my goals and everything else. It all started with understanding that. And it was from that journey back to health and the understanding of what dropped me off the health scale and what brought me back onto it. And then all of the wonderful habits and realizations and new ways of thinking of the world that I learned through that journey was what I shared.
You know, that, again, like I said at the beginning, writers have so many things that are very individual, but yet when we sit back and we evaluate what's going on outside of us, quite often we're not the only one going through it. And, you know, it's not that it's common, and I most certainly am not downplaying any of it, because it is that catalyst that says, like you said, that reins us in. Whoa, wait a minute. How do I take care of me? How do I become responsible for myself? Mm-hmm. I'm not good to the world, you know, if I'm not taking care of me. And I'm, you know, it's not that you're not good to the world. I shouldn't say it that way. But anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. That it's difficult for us to participate in the way we imagine we are, when we're not actually physically, energetically, mentally capable of being there if we're not there for ourselves, we can't be there really for other people. And that has been a hard concept for me to really sit back and like, whoa, okay, so now what do I do with this information? Which I think is what we all kind of go through when we hit that, like you said, when we get so disconnected from self and we're like, wait a minute, who am I? What am I doing? Is this really what I want? And yes, external success that has been something that we have been taught is a must. You must look good on the outside. Forget about the inside. Who needs to work on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is really strong. And it's almost like seen as a bad word, self-care and me time and being, selfish. As in attending to self first. It's got such negative connotations. Now, clearly you can take it to the extremes, and we all know people who take it to the extremes, and they're not helpful to anyone. But generally, I think that analogy with the oxygen mask that we all are familiar with is a very true one. Put your own mask on first before helping somebody else. It's a really good metaphor for life, because if we don't attend to the things of our own needs, what we do is we end up going to other people with all of these unmet needs playing out in the background while we're trying to help or hinder or something in between other people around us. So the reality is that internal maintenance, that internal love, that internal compassion is key to us being able to achieve anything successful.
Yes. And such an important conversation, especially nowadays, since the world has been going through this transformational period, unlike anything. You're in which country?
I'm in England. Yes, so it's a British accent you can hear. I'm in England.
I thought I would make sure that everybody knows that we're in two separate countries. I'm sitting in the state of Michigan in the United States. She's sitting in England. And so the whole world has been impacted. And the other message that I really want to bring awareness to is the fact that you have had a much different cultural upbringing than what I have. I mean, we're in two different countries, but yet we're so similar in many ways because generically put, we've gone through similar things, not the same experiences, but we're sitting back and going, yep, I got to take care of me. And yes, for a long time, it was so selfish. How dare you take care of yourself? You need to take care of me first. The other person saying, how dare you? And I need you to take care of me. And we were taught, again, that it is something to give to others. Yeah. We were never taught receive, give. So what was the passion that fueled you to write The Female Edge?
Well, that was a continuation. So even though I've brought more mindfulness and more of what I'd call successful habits and better lifestyle habits into the work I do with my corporates, that still remains my main focus. And what I observed was that when I worked on big transformation projects and something was delivered that was important to the organization, I would see that the senior male members of the team would often do very well as a result. They would get promotion quite quickly, or they'd be given a new area to look after. And the female leaders, who would also have been equally pivotal in the delivery of things, weren't doing so well. And I seen that all the way through the organization. They just didn't reach the same heights. They weren't promoted as quickly. They weren't given the same opportunities. There weren't the same risks taken on them that there would be of their male colleagues, even though they probably had more abilities. And so it was recognizing that uneven playing field that I felt I wanted to step in and champion that more fully. So the book is about how can women find their path to leadership success in corporate, or as a solopreneur, or in a more independent path, or even in their own life, their life with their family. But how can they find success which is meaningful to them and is based on their own terms, as opposed to constantly trying to play the rules of a playing field which is much more geared towards men and men's success and men's behavioural needs as well, which doesn't actually always align with the way that women see the world and the way that women want to show up.
Right, because men and women have what was that book? Men are from Mars, women are from
Yeah.
Venus. We
Yeah.
think different, we react different, and that's genetics. And
I would say I think part of it is genetics. But I think part of it is the socialization process. So, and we can see this across different cultures and things, is what we do is as soon as a baby is born and we put a gender on it, there's all sorts of expectations that are placed on that baby based on that gender. And with them expectations become behavioral expectations as well as life expectations and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we see as a result of that, men, it's more go-getting, being into sports and competitiveness and being assertive and even being aggressive to a point is seen as good. That's what we want from our men. And then women, it's being much more gentle, being kind, being supportive, being there as a person who can help other people to do well. And I'm not saying that women aren't socialized to be successful, because clearly they are, and there's lots of successful women out there. But generally, there's a very different set of messages that go to them. And if women tend to have behaviours which are seen as more masculine in their traits based on the way that we see things in society, they're often given a much harsher consequences in terms of that not being acceptable than you would with men who would behave in the same way. So the whole way that things work, I think, is as much to do with, as a society, how we define gender as it is to do with genetics.
Agreed. And as soon as I said that, I thought that doesn't kind of roll in how things are now, because there has been a huge shift in how we as individuals respond to excuse me, how we respond to the different individuals and where they're at. And then, of course, in the last, again, our roles in so many aspects of life have changed in the last year and a half with this whole COVID pandemic. The EDGE model, again, I went onto your website and did a little exploring. And the EDGE model, it has 4 stages of transformation for female leaders. Can you share with us what those 4 stages are?
I will, and I'll just share 2 premises behind it. I've already talked about one premise, which was the uneven playing field, and there's 2 others which then drive how I've written the book and the messages. So the first one is the one I've already talked about from my first book, which is success is an inside job. So for us to find success on the outside, we have to understand who we are, what we're about, what's important to us. And then the other premise is that change happens through action. It doesn't happen through ideas. It doesn't happen through theories. It doesn't happen through knowledge. It happens through what we do with all of that information that we've got stored in our mind. So what are the actions we take? What are the new steps? What are the new habits we form to help us to move to a new stage and therefore to have some transformation in our life? And they can be micro habits or they can be major life changes, but whatever it is, as long as it's an action, it will result in change. And so as a result of that, this book, like the first one, very practical. It turns into practical things quite quickly, because that's what I want people to do, move to action quickly. And the 4 stages to help people to do that are, the first one, the first E is evaluate what got you here. So what have been the influences and drivers of my journey to date? I talk about it in terms of career journey, but you could talk about it in life journey. It works the same if you do biographical work as well. It's like, what have been the things that have been positive experiences? What have been the negative? What influenced me to take them decisions? What did I move on to? How did that help? And with them insights, we have a great understanding of what have been the things that have been maybe driving me, and have they been things I have really liked and got some benefit from, or have they been things that have actually not served me well and have left me in a state of being not very happy. Once we've evaluated it, we can then go to the second step, which is define where you want to go. So understanding where we are, how we got here and why we're here, we can then make better decisions about where we want to go. And I use a framework called a vision and roadmap, which is based from my strategic models with companies, really, but it works very well in the personal sphere. If we looked at between a 2 and a 5 year timeline, what would be the big vision I'd want to achieve? And what are the different areas of my life that I would be working on and taking action in to help me to go towards that vision? And I tend to put that in a much wider context, because it's not just about your current role. It's not about your organization. It's not just about the discipline that you're working in. There might be all sorts of influences there, but it's also about your family life. It's also about your community. It's also about your finances. So there's all sorts of other areas that also are brought into that map as well, to help me to define, how do I get to a vision which is holistic to me and my life goals, not just about the next level of job I'm looking for. And then the third step is grow into your ideal leader. So what are the habits? What are the skills? What are the ways of thinking, behaving, and expressing myself that will help me to become the leader that I see myself being in the future? And as I said, although I work a lot in the corporate world, so I'm talking about it in terms of corporate environments, that works as well, whether you're a solopreneur, whether you're somebody that's actually got a community role that you do, voluntary or paid, or even if you're in a family situation and you're bringing up children. All of them are leadership roles. So I think it helps with all of them. And then the final one is empower your success. So that's around, what are the things that I can do to help myself? So some of that we've talked about, like me time, understanding what are the ways I can re-energize myself, reconnect to my values, reconnect to the things that are important to me, so that I can actually then be there for other people in a meaningful way. But it's also about building a community of other people who support you. So your little team of cheerleaders. And your cheerleaders might take very different forms. So one of them might be, a director in the company that you're working in, who has worked there for many years and has got a really good reputation and can help you along your career. A male or female, a director that might be. Or it might be some really good friends of yours that you know that you can trust and you can speak to and you can share things. Or it might be past bosses or past colleagues. So there could be a whole range of people, but who are the people around you that you can use to bounce things off, that you can get ideas from, that you can actually go to and share some thoughts with, early thoughts of something you're thinking of doing, and maybe getting their ideas about whether you're right for that, whether you've got the skills for it, and whether this is the right time for you. Because people who you know and trust, and to a certain extent have got a loving relationship with, let's not talk about the director in that sense, let's talk about friends,
right.
You can actually get the right sort of feedback that you can hear, because you're in a place where you know that you're understood, that you're listened to, and that you're heard as an individual.
And I appreciate the getting the feedback from those who know how you work, who know your strengths and some of your weaknesses, because we as individuals tend to not see our own weaknesses and our own strengths, because I have a friend that will tell me, oh, you're so great at XYZ, and I'm like, I am, and it's natural to me. I can, I just do this. And she's like, I can't, where, and then where we think we're brilliant, you take me again as the example. I when I'm recording the podcast, I think, oh my goodness, I sound brilliant. I'm asking the right questions. I'm moving through, and then I go to edit it and I hear, so, and long drawn out ands. And it's like, whoa, okay, so I'm not this great, brilliant podcast interviewer, but hey, I'm doing it. So, okay, I'm good with
it. Well, let me just say, you are a very good podcast interviewer, but sometimes, that sort of feedback is unrelenting, isn't it? Because even me, when I do a video, I do lots of video content, and I listen to it back and I cringe inside because of something I hear. So sometimes we are our worst critics with things like that, because when we hear it, we're not always loving to ourselves about how we'll hear it and the filters we will use.
Right. And so it is good. And of course, in our minds, we plan out these great ideas and, oh, this is so going to work. And then we tell somebody and all they have to do is ask one question. And typically it starts with how. And it's like, maybe this wasn't such a great idea. But, our imaginations are there for a reason. They fuel us and inspire us. But anyways, what was for you with writing either of your books? I'll let you choose which book to tackle this question with. What was one of the biggest lessons that you learned from writing?
Just do it. I think I read Stephen King's On Writing, which is a great book. He's more towards fiction, but it's still a great book. And he says, if you want to write, write. Don't talk about writing. Don't think about writing. Don't put it down in a planner that you'll do writing. Just do it. Yeah. And there's a certain amount of wisdom in that, even though it thinks like, well, is that advice? It is advice. But what I did with both of the books is I carved out time. Well, first of all, I'd set the intention that I was going to write the book. Mm-hmm. And I talk about intentions being very different from an idea or a target or a goal. All of them are important. But when you've put an intention behind it, what you're saying is, I'm going to put my internal energy and my mind to the task to make sure I get it done, because it's important to me. If we set a goal that can be externally driven, so it means like, I'd really like to get, I'd like to get 30 pounds lighter by an X amount of time, but we sort of know we're not going to put the energy into it. So intention is a little bit deeper. It's a bit like goal setting, but it's deeper. We know we're connected to it. We're going to do it. So my intention was there for both books at the very beginning. And then I carved out time. So what I did with this second one was I actually went on a group writing program, because I knew I could do it on my own, but I wanted to be efficient. I didn't want to take a long, drawn out process to do it. The first book took me 9 months to do. This book took me 3 months to do. So I was just much quicker. And some of what I did, it was part of the program, but it was also part of me, is you write the first draft in 6 weeks. And every day, apart from the weekends, every day for 6 weeks, I got up at 5 a.m. and I made sure I wrote for a minimum of 1 hour or 1,000 words, whichever came first, or whichever one that actually felt like it was the natural stop for me. Before I stopped. So I did it before any of my normal day had started, because what I understood was, if I left it into my normal day, I'd allow things like emails and phone calls and client deadlines and all sorts of things to distract me, because they would see as important. Whereas actually, if I carved out the time separate from my normal working day, it could work. Now, I'm not really a really early bird person. There are people who probably listen to your program who are. I'm not, but I'm also not a night owl. So I know my creativity has dried up by about 5 p.m. my time. So there's no point me trying to carve it out in the evening. So it's a stretch for me. I do get up and I'm bleary-eyed, but it doesn't matter. That's my goal. And I set an intention to do it in a certain amount of time. Once you've got the first draft out the way, it does become so much easier, because it's like anything. Once you haven't got a blank piece of paper in front of you, once you're looking at words and you're editing words and you're restructuring it, it becomes a much easier process. Mm-hmm. So taking that time for the first draft is essential, because from there you can move to the next stage.
You brought up something that is important to mention, is knowing when your creative time is. When are you more likely to put down the words on a page? Is that, are you more creatively inspired in the morning? Is it 2 o'clock in the afternoon? Is it 8 o'clock at night after the kids have gone to bed? And it's finding our own rhythm, because to me, I'm that early morning writer. That's when, before I even open my email, that's when I try to write. Or it in reverse, there are some days where 2:00 in the afternoon, when I've tackled the emails, I've assisted this client and that virtual client and so forth, and it's like, ooh, you know what? And all it takes is that little spark. That would be, oh, I need to add that. And then I, sit down and, oh my goodness, an hour goes by, and it's, I lose time when I'm writing. I don't know if you do.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's finding our own rhythm and allowing it to be flexible. Not that you have to have this rigid, 10 a.m. every day. Some days it might be 8 a.m. Some days it might be, 6:00 at night when you're doing something complete, eating dinner at the dinner table, and you just write it off on a sheet of paper. How do you feel we can inspire more writers to share their own stories and their passion? Because like you mentioned, both your stories were on your experiences, your health, your travels, your stress levels, your successes, and so forth. So how do you feel that you and I here on this podcast, can inspire more writers to share their stories and their passions?
I think the first one is believe that the story that you have is a valid one and one that people want to listen to. Most would-be writers stop at that first step, which is, well, who would listen to me? And I've read X's book or Y's book, and they were so much better, and I could never achieve that standard. And they stop at the first hurdle. But it's don't stop there. It's like, start where your story leads you, and just write it down as it comes out. So one of the things I do, and my first book, I wrote a lot like this, is I like longhand, so I like a journal. And if you're somebody that actually has moments of brilliance during your day, and then they get lost in your busyness and you never follow them up, is get yourself a journal, which is a special journal for your writing. It's not a work journal, it's not your daily diary, it's not anything else. It's a journal which you're going to write down your writing ideas, and then whenever you have a moment, is pop them down. And it doesn't matter where you start, but start somewhere. And then just follow it on. Whatever you've written down, is follow it on with a few questions of, why is that important? Why did I write that now? Why is that something that I think other people want to hear? So have some why questions and use them to follow on whatever you've started, and just start like that. And then within a few weeks of even doing journal writing like that, you've probably got enough to transcribe, either using an audio app if you don't like typing, or typing. I actually like longhand typing because there's something goes on in my brain that actually filters it, so there's a natural editing process for me then. But even you can read it out to an app, and then just see how that comes through, and then start to think about how you might structure that into a book that actually has meaning for people.
I like that. I couldn't have said that any better. And that is a very honest statement. I don't think I could have said that any better. How did the process of writing your most recent book, how did it really begin for you? What was that spark that says, oh, I need to write this down, I need to write another book?
Yeah. Well, how it came out, this one, which was, it was quicker to do and it was more focused, was because I as well as doing my corporate work with my clients, I do a lot of female coaching programs as well. So I either go into organizations and do group programs or individual client work. So I have a whole range of tools and techniques and models, either my own that I've created or ones that are more generic that I use, that actually I bring women on a journey to help understand themselves and what they want in life, and then go forth and get it, and have lots of success stories through that coaching. And it was realizing at the end of last year, I thought, actually, this would make a really good book. I could actually put this into a structure and put it into a book. So it was the end of last year I realized that. And then at the beginning of this year, I set an intention, I'm going to write a book this year. I was just really clear it was one of my intentions. And I went on a book builder program. It's called Book Builder, a program that actually just helps you to structure your way through it. The last one I used a coach. So what I've learned, as a coach and as somebody who goes in and advises organizations, is that if you've never written a book before, I've done a lot of writing, a lot of professional writing and blogging and all sorts of things. But if you've never written a book before, it's a much easier journey to go on with somebody. So I used a book coach on my first book. I used the Book Builder program on my second book. And it just allowed me to have some discipline, some tram lines for me to write within, and a structure and steps that I would follow to get me to the manuscript at the end. So it only took 3 months from beginning to end to get from starting to get to the manuscript that was going to the publisher.
And congratulations on being able to do that in 3 months and have that dedication and the powerful intention set that I am doing this. And there's obviously a lot that motivated you, a lot behind the scene that motivated you to do that. Because if we don't have the motivation, it can take us 6 years to write a book, or if we don't have the clear vision of what is the point of this book, then, we're just putting words on the page. And, when we go back to read it, it's like, what was the point of this? Where was I going with this content? And, the next person is going to read this and it's going to lead them to nowhere. It's going to lead them down that dead end road. That's like, why did we travel here?
Yeah.
So to have that clear.
You've said something really important there, actually, and this is different from, I don't know if you get novel writers on, because I've also got a novel in tow, but I'm forever playing with that. But even with novels, but non-fiction, one of the most important things to think about, and I wasn't as clear about that with Coming Home to You, but I was with this second book, The Female Age, is who is your ideal reader? And in Coming Home to You, I said, everyone. This book can help anyone. It's about life, and it's about habits, and it's about mindfulness, and great, it could help anyone. But by being so unspecific with my readership, I wasn't clear about drawing in the right reader. So in the second book, I was really clear about who is my ideal audience, who is my ideal reader. So if you're writing a book, particularly a non-fiction one, it's really good to have in mind who is my ideal reader. Even if it could serve everyone and it could be beneficial for everyone, just be really clear about, but who would be the ideal person. As I'm writing it, imagine them sitting opposite me on the table, and actually I'm almost speaking the conversation to them that I'm writing down, because that helps you to be really, really clear about your message and how to structure your message. And then once you've got the book out, because it's not a road to glory or a road to riches publishing books. It's just a very expensive hobby generally. But once you've got the book out, you then have to be able to talk about it and market it and share it with people. And the more you're clear about who it is for, the easier it is to do that.
You bring on such an important, I'll tell you, you and I are most certainly fueling the conversation, and we keep bringing up very powerful points and important ones that need to be shared, because there are those writers that are, like you said at the very beginning, feel insignificant in sharing their story. And it's like, no, your words have power, and that's been the whole point of this podcast, is to remind everyone your words have power, no matter who you say them to, whether it's yourself, whether it's, to somebody else, to the stranger at the post office, your friend at the grocery store, your mother on the phone. Your words have power. Mm-hmm. And the other part of what I share is your story matters. Your story matters. It matters that we share our truth and share what we feel and share how, because generically put, we all want to help somebody. We all want to guide somebody. We all have that tendency to want to reach back and help that person that's 2 steps behind and say, here, come here. I can help you. I've navigated that trail. It's a sucky trail. You want to avoid this, you want to do that, and we all have these pearls of wisdom that we share. And we don't realize how much value that those pearls of wisdom have, because that person that's 2 steps behind is in a whole different thought pattern than we are. And it's like, oh, I didn't even comprehend that. I didn't think about that. Oh, that's a good idea. Or in reverse, oh, no, that does not resonate with me. I'm going to take a different path. It provides us with that free will.
Absolutely.
But it gives us those examples, and we learn through community. We learn through conversation, and we learn through stories. It's all about communication, which when I was reading through your stuff, and checking into how did I want to kind of move the conversation, what I notice is communication is very, very important in what your services offer. Is communication is vital, that we're not meant to be a one person show, that community is important. And you had mentioned it earlier, that partnership with your friends, partnership with your former bosses, your current bosses, your coworkers, your friends, and the value in that. And conversation. I mean, look at what you and I have pulled out in this conversation in particular.
It is essential. And again, just going back to that storytelling bit. So even, like non-fiction books still have stories in them. They have lots of stories in them. We're always telling stories. That's how we make sense of the world. If we take ourselves away from the written word that we are so reliant on now, when we go back tens of thousands of years, the way that we made sense of the world was the stories that were handed down from generation to generation to explain creation, to explain the natural world, to explain, humans. It was the way that we understood things, and it's still the way. At the part of our mind and the way our brain works is we need stories to help put things into context. So the more each of us contributes to that overall story landscape, the easier it is for more and more people to navigate.
Yes. And it's how we keep from repeating history, is through story. Because you learned the lesson. A society learned a lesson. A small group of people, a group of friends, it doesn't matter the size of the group. The history is shared, and it brings us. And no worries on the little interruption. It's all good. It is. Life happens, and it's really amazing what happens during the recording of podcasts. So it is all good. So for you, how did the difference between writing Coming Home to You and The Female Edge impact you creatively? Oh my gosh, I can't. How did it impact your creativity? I'll say it that way. I'm stuttering my words. It's too early in the morning to talk, I think. It's afternoon.
So in terms of how was it creatively I
am so sorry I set that into you.
How was it different creatively with me writing Coming Home to You to The Female Edge? So Coming Home to You was very much an emergent book. So what happened with that was I just had a really strong pull that I wanted to write a book which helped to share my story from ill health to health and what I learned along the way. And then what was the different areas of life that people could learn to create new ways of thinking and new habits and new actions that would help them to move to a more positive, more life affirming path. so I didn't have a sense of what that was when I was starting it. I just knew that that was generally the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did was every morning I'd wake up and I'd do my morning meditation. And I'd take about 20 minutes, and then I'd get in front of the computer, and then I'd start writing. And I think, oh, this chapter is about money, or this chapter is about body image, or this chapter is about career. So I actually didn't know what it was until I started writing it. So although I had this general goal, the actual specific chapters only came out through me just going through a process day by day. And that felt quite comfortable. And as I said, I used a coach. So I'd send, every time I'd done a chapter, I'd send it to her. She'd give me some feedback and some ideas, not editing, just generally, how does it all fit together? And then I'd go back and do some more. So she never ever suggested a chapter to me. She left that entirely to me. She just helped me if it either was structured enough or whether it needed a bit more or something like that. So it was very helpful. Whereas the female edge, I was just a lot more methodical about it. I mean, I even went on a book writing program which was methodical. You know, it was a tried and tested method from somebody who's helped, you know, thousands of authors over the years to actually write a book, and it's just her method. And also I planned out the book before I wrote one word of any chapter. So it was completely the opposite. It was, you know, what were the different chapter headings? What was the core model? Why was it this model? Who was my audience? Why was I writing to them? And so all of that was worked out before I actually wrote a word. I think both of them have merit. I think if I wanted to have more of an exploratory, I've got another book in mind next year, and I think that will use the same planned method. But if I think I wanted to explore more the spiritual side of life, which is more the coming home to you, or more how life emerges when you allow it to happen, I'd use that emergent process. But if I want to get a book out which is about tried and tested methods I've used that I know work for people and I want to share them, I'd probably use the planned method.
Interesting. And you successfully published using two very different ways of putting that pen to paper and getting it, the message down and publishing. So for you, was the editing or the publishing or the marketing the more challenging of the whole process after you've written that manuscript?
It always is marketing. I mean, one of the ones as a first-time author people struggle with is the beta reader process. So the beta readers are the people you go to before you go to a final edit and proofreading and get their views of it. So it's a pre-published review of the book. And that can feel quite scary. So my first book, Coming Home to You, I think I had about 6 beta readers. Some of them I knew very well, and some of them I knew more professionally or through some of the work that I was doing. And that felt like I was giving a little piece of my soul to them. And I was thinking, oh, please be gentle. This is my soul. So I remember feeling very cautious about that. That can be quite a big one. And I think first-time authors, that does feel like a struggle, you know, because you don't know how they're going to respond. But the reality is that is an essential step, because giving it to somebody who gives you feedback, who knows you and cares about you, is a much better way of doing it than actually not going through that process and then it going out into the world and then getting very, very poor response or unfavorable reviews. So it's really essential, but it can feel quite challenging. The Female Edge it's a professional book. It's for professional women. There was lots of professional women who reviewed it, and it was a very straightforward process. So there wasn't quite that same sense of vulnerability. But marketing is always the challenge, because books these days are in a very, very noisy space. You know, you've got, if you publish mainly on Amazon, we do these days, which I think is a shame for individual bookshops, but that tends to be the way it's going. Even if you get it to individual bookshops. So my first book was very much a bookshop driven approach. This one is more Amazon driven approach. It's very noisy. There's, you know, you're competing with hundreds of thousands of other authors out there who've done books which may be similar to the way that you do it, or have a slightly different angle, or the author may be known in a different way. So you're having to think about, how do I get my book and my voice heard in that very noisy stage? So if you're an author who says, oh, I don't need to do the marketing, the book will sell itself, good luck with that is all I'd say, because unless you hit lucky and you hit with somebody who's a big influence and they love the book and they push it for you, it's only going to get out there if you do the work that I'm doing now with you and with other podcasters and with my social media and with the conversations and sending it out to my clients and all the other things I need to do to let people know that I've written a book and I want them to know about it.
Yes. Marketing is one of those aspects of it is probably more provides us with more of a sense of vulnerability than having the beta reader read the book, that initial reading of quote unquote our baby. And because with the beta reader we have control in who sees it, where with marketing, we're putting ourselves out there and we have no control. Well, if you have control, let me rephrase that. If you have control in who sees your marketing, you're not marketing. You're just telling your friends, neighbors, family members, and coworkers that, hey, I did this book. But if you're truly doing marketing, you're more vulnerable because you're sharing it with anybody and everybody that you reach. And yes, it is very challenging. It's probably where I struggle the most is that marketing element, getting myself out there. And I have so many friends, just like anybody else, that says, you got to think big. And I'm like, I'd rather stay hidden in my camper in Texas or New Mexico or, in Arkansas or Louisiana, wherever I've been, or will be. And, we tend, and a lot of that is because writers tend to be those that are working on our books. We're putting ourselves out there. That's scary. And because we don't want to be criticized by somebody else for the journey we've been on and the choices we've made. And that can be something that we have to overcome because, we'd rather play small, but yet be successful.
And it's quite hard to pull that trick off. It does happen, but not very often.
Right.
It is a hard one, and I think it's not just something that you get to the launch and then you're done. You have to continue going well after the launch. I think that was a big learning for me in my first book, and then I got some PR support. And my second book, I actually I got a social media person the second time because I thought it's going to be a social media driven approach, and actually she gave me a structured 3-month plan to work to, and that's what I work to now. But I got help with that because although I'm pretty good on social media and things like that, when you selling a book or selling the concepts behind the book, you just need to get into a slightly different space to the space you were in when you were writing it.
Oh, yes. And it is beneficial to have that other person to help with setting up, because we're focused here. Where our audience member may be focused way over here, and if we're just sitting over here, we're not going to reach the actual reader. And having that outside source, kind of bring the two groups together and see it in a different light that we as the writer might not. Again, our personal interpretation of what we've done is very different from how others perceive it, because our opinion of our work is based on how do we feel about ourselves, how do we talk to ourselves in the mirror, when we're falling asleep, what do we say to ourselves? All of that inner work has a huge impact on how we perceive our work, where somebody else is like, whoa, this is so cool. I needed this. Thank you. Thank you. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, it's very true. We're not always the best judge of our own work, both in a positive and a negative way. we tend to go to the extremes of, seeing it as flawless when it isn't, or seeing it as really awful when it isn't. And we're very, very poor at finding that middle line between the two and really understanding, which is why we need other people around to help us and help with our confidence at times as well.
Community. I can't say it enough times. It is so important. Yeah. Before we run out of time, because we're pushing the clock, I just happened to look at time, and this, and it's so funny. I say that if you listen to the podcast, it's typically what I say at the end of pretty much probably 90% of I just looked at the clock, saw what time it is, and wow, we've been talking for a long time. Before we end the podcast, I want to make sure people know how to find you on the internet. How can they find you?
Well, I would say that the best place to go is my main website, which is findyourjoyfullife.com. So it's a long one, but I break it down, findyourjoyfullife.com. And on there, you can find details of both the books, Coming Home to You and The Female Edge. There's lots of blogs around different things you can do to live a happier, healthier, more fulfilled life. And there's a number of the tools that I talk about in The Edge, which are just freely available for people if they want them as well.
Okay. And then you also have your agents2change.com website.
I do. Yes. Yeah. That one tends to be my corporate clients use that one a lot. So I use that one for them. But I think I haven't put as much on there, which is just like, get this, get that free, because they just tend to want my white papers or talk to me about big change. But agents2change.com is where I service my corporate clients. Oh, and it's number 2, I should say, agents with the number 2 change.com.
Yes. And I will have both websites listed on the show notes page, and we will make sure that is on there. So anything that you wanted to share that I did not bring up during this conversation, and we've brought up a lot of stuff.
Now, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to you, Cindy, because what you're doing is, you've said you're not good at marketing, but you really are putting yourself out there. Podcast is a big deal to do. There's a lot of work behind it, and you're putting yourself out there. And the way that you're looking for authors and helping to showcase their work, but also the writing process behind it, I think is going to be helping countless people out there with their own writing journey. So thank you for the service that you're providing to the writers and would-be writers out there.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. That is something, when I set out to do the podcast, it was what was important. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to, one element, yes, is that I want to help writers to promote their books, because that is why, we appear on the podcasts and so forth. But what's the story behind it? What struggles did you face when you wrote? Because again, we sit in front of our writing apparatus, whether it's pen and paper, or whether it's a dictation machine, whether it's our laptops or our computers, a keyboard, or typewriter. I know some who use a typewriter. Whatever writing apparatus, we sit for long periods of time by ourselves, tuning out everything around us. We're tuning out the guy mowing the lawn down the road. We're tuning out the kids in the other room. We're tuning out, the significant other in the other room who wants our attention. We're tuning out the world. Or if we're sitting in a coffee shop writing, we're tuning out our surroundings. So we get so caught into that, and we forget so easily how what we're experiencing is generically similar to what somebody else is experiencing as well. And we kind of loop into that whole mindset of, oh, what am I doing? And then when we hear that somebody else went through the same thing, it's like, oh my gosh, they did it. Oh, yes, thank you. It gives us that encouragement. And again, we learn through other people's journey. When they've traversed similar terrain, we're like, oh, so that's how they did it. Okay, I can do that. So it's sharing the story of how we got from point A to point B, how we got through our own struggles, and the story behind the stories. Those are all important things. And I love to talk, obviously. And I'm always, conversation is how we share not only our stories, but the lessons that we've learned and communicate our thoughts and our beliefs. So, Mary, oh my gosh, thank you. I am so grateful to have you here, and the amount of information about our self-esteem and our thoughts of self and how we interpreted that. It really has come through strong as a message within this. And do it, like you said, quoting Stephen King, just do it. Just do it. Don't talk about it. Don't think about it. Just do it.
Yeah. Like anything in life, if you need to get it done, just go and do it.
Yes. Don't hesitate. Just, stand up straight, put your shoulders back, raise your head up and say, I got this. I can do it. And just take, even if it's a itty bitty little baby step that's an inch, it's better than standing idle going, I can't do this, which is easy to do. Much easier to do than saying, I can do this. But anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Before we end our time together, I'd like to say thank you for listening to my conversation with Mary McGuire. To access her website and purchase the books she has written, visit pentopaperpress.com/podcast and select the show notes page for this episode. To receive future episodes in your inbox, subscribe to the newsletter and follow this podcast on your favorite application. You are invited to share your favorite episodes with individuals you believe will resonate with the content. Take care, and until next time, keep your pen to paper and write. Your words have power, and your story matters. Bye for now.